Well, as many places around the world celebrate today, it is important to highlight the saint behind it all. I recently spoke with EWTN's Father Patrick Mary to discuss the life of St. Patrick, including his conversion story and how he evangelized Ireland. And joining me now to discuss is Father Patrick Mary Russell, Vocation Director for the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word. Father Patrick, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be with you.
So let's talk a little bit more about St. Patrick and also his conversion story.
Sure. So we know it's a great blessing because we have some of the writings of St. Patrick that have been passed down through the centuries. And one of those that we get a lot of information from is his own, what's called a confessio, or his own confession that he wrote, basically how God had worked through his life. And we know that he was born in the late 4th century. And he mentions that when he was 16, that he said, "I did not know the true God." So he admits that he was not close to God. Very interestingly, he mentioned also that his dad was a deacon, his grandfather was a priest. So again, he was a free decision of his. He just said, I did not know the true God. So he was doing his own thing. But something we know traumatic happened to him when he was 16. There were some Irish pirates that came over. It's believed that Patrick he grew up in the west coast of Britain, on the west side of Britain. And so he was captured, basically kidnapped by these Irish pirates, taken back to Ireland and sold into slavery. And it was in the midst of that, like he was over there for 6 years, and his responsibility was to basically be a shepherd as a slave. And it was in the midst of those 6 years that he had a conversion experience, that he received the gift of faith and the gift of prayer, and he developed a great love for prayer. And he had an encounter with God. He felt inspired. The Lord was leading him to his escape, and he was able to get back to home, again with this renewed zeal, this renewed love for God and his faith. What was very interesting is in the midst of that, he had a vision and a dream that the Irish were calling him back. And you can only imagine how difficult that may have been because of his traumatic experience over there. But it was in the midst of that he again was discerning, felt the call to the priesthood, was trained. He was ordained as a priest, was consecrated as a bishop, and was sent to Ireland.
We know he also had a lot of sufferings along the way.
He did, and it's a great lesson and inspiration for us too, with our faith, that we know that God can he's able to bring good out of evil and out of suffering. There's been, I remember listening to a talk on the life of St. Patrick, and a parallel was made between Patrick and Joseph from the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, that Joseph, we know, was basically betrayed by his brothers. He was sold into slavery into a foreign country, but it was through that great suffering, that traumatic experience, that he ended up saving that foreign country. He saved Egypt during a time of famine, and he also saved his own people, his own family. So Patrick was kidnapped into a foreign country, was sold as a slave. He eventually would go back and bring salvation, the saving message of the gospel, to Ireland, the very country where he was a slave. But also we know that as time went on and the faith really grew in Ireland, Ireland would send out missionaries throughout the entire world. And so he would go back to his own home country, that missionaries would go there and just bring the faith. And we see again God's providence. It was also, when he was in this foreign country, he learned the language, which seems like very practical, very small, but again, that would be helpful when he went back to preach and to bring the faith.
Yeah, definitely. And we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to talk about his evangelization efforts too.
Sure. So, that's the thing too. We look at how the Lord used him. Again, it starts with his own conviction of the truths of our faith, and then when we have that, we want to pass it on to everyone else. So that's what he went through. Much suffering. He was not only this traumatic experience as a young man, but he was also betrayed by a friend of his from the past, whom he confided something that he was really struggling with. His friend betrayed him. It caused him a lot of suffering. So he went through many trials, but again, it's his love for Christ and the knowing God's mercy for his own soul that he wanted to pass that saving message to many others, and he would nonstop preaching the faith, until his death.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share about St. Patrick?
Sure.
That maybe, I know there's a lot of things about St. Patrick that maybe aren't true or people don't know or those type of things.
Yeah. So very quickly, a lot of things that are associated with him are driving snakes out of Ireland. I was just reading recently, I don't think that wasn't written into any accounts of his life until I believe it was like over 200 years after his death. So as far as how authentic that is, I don't know. I can't say that. There's also the shamrock, it's often associated with him. I don't think that's in his own personal writings. I don't know how that was woven into the accounts of his life, but he certainly had a profound sense of the Trinity, which the shamrock is often used to explain. I will say, though, that one thing with Patrick is that he had such a great love for Scripture, and his Confessions, which is only like 60-something paragraphs explaining his life, scholars have found like over 100 references or quotes from Scripture in that. And he says, he starts off saying, "I, Patrick, a sinner and unlearned man." So he wasn't a scholar, but you could tell he was so steeped in Scripture, he like lived and breathed it, that it just came out when he was writing about his life. And I think that's a good example for us, that we should be really familiar with the Bible, with sacred Scripture, as it guides us.
Absolutely. Well, Father Patrick, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us about St. Patrick. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.